In 1588, England faced what seemed like certain doom. A massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, was sailing across the Channel, sent by King Philip II of Spain to invade England and overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. And for centuries, the story's been told the exact same way. Brave English soldiers, led by heroic captains like Francis Drake and Charles Howard, outsmarted the mighty Spanish Navy and saved their nation through courage and clever tactics. But that's not exactly how it happened. Because when you look closely at the evidence, the battle reports, the wrecks, and the meteorological data, it turns out England didn't defeat the Spanish Armada at all. The weather did. Let's rewind to the late 16th century. Spain was, without doubt, the superpower of Europe, the richest empire in the world, thanks to silver and gold it extracted from the Americas. England, by comparison, was a scrappy underdog. Elizabeth I's navy was smaller, less experienced, and, honestly, just trying to survive. But Philip II had a score to settle. He was furious that Elizabeth had rejected his marriage proposal, that she had executed his ally Mary Queen of Scots, and that English privateers like Francis Drake had been raiding Spanish ships and stealing treasure. So in 1588, he launched one of the most ambitious military operations in European history, a 130-ship armada, carrying around 30,000 men, including sailors, soldiers, priests, and nobles. The plan was simple, in theory. The armada would sail from Spain to the English Channel, join forces with the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands, and then invade England. Philip even called it the Enterprise of England. It was supposed to be quick, unstoppable. But there was one big thing the Spanish didn't fully account for: the weather in the North Atlantic. The English did fight bravely, that's part true. When the Armada arrived off the Cornish coast in late July 1588, the English Navy used smaller, faster ships that could dart in and fire cannons, and then pull away before lumbering Spanish galleons could react. But those hit-and-run tactics weren't decisive. For almost a week, the two sides danced through the Channel, exchanging cannon fire, but causing relatively little damage. The Armada's formation, called the Crescent, was nearly impossible to break. It protected the transport ships in the middle, and the English couldn't get close enough to do serious damage. Still, the Armada was struggling. They were short on ammunition, the winds weren't in their favour, and the English ships were constantly harassing them from the back. Then on the night of August the 7th, the English tried something new. They sent in 8 fire ships, old vessels filled with gunpowder and pitch, drifting into the anchored Spanish fleet off Calais. The Spanish panicked. They cut their anchor cables and scattered, fearing an explosion. And that's the moment when the Armada lost its tight formation. The next morning, the English attacked at the Battle of Gravelines. It was a fierce fight, lots of smoke, cannon fire and confusion, but surprisingly few Spanish ships actually sank. The English ran out of ammunition before they could finish the job, and the Spanish, well, they managed to retreat. Damaged, yes, but not destroyed. So if the English didn't actually sink the Armada, then what did? After Gravelines, the Spanish still had one goal: regroup with the Duke of Parma's army and invade. But the winds, well, they had different ideas. Strong southwesterly winds pinned the Armada against the North Sea coast. They couldn't turn back through the Channel without sailing directly into English guns. So the Spanish commander, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, made a desperate decision. He would sail north around Scotland, then back past Ireland, and return home to Spain, an 1,800-mile detour through some of the most dangerous waters in Europe. And that's when the real disaster began. As the Armada entered the North Atlantic, it sailed straight into a series of brutal storms, what we now know were late summer Atlantic cyclones. Winds howled, waves towered higher than the masts, ships lost their sails, rudders and anchors. And remember, during the fireship attack, most Spanish captains had cut their anchors loose. Now in the open ocean, they couldn't steady their ships when the weather turned. That mistake, forced by panic, not by English cannon fire, sealed their fate. As the Armada limped around the top of Scotland, the storms tore it apart. Some ships were driven onto the rocks of the Hebrides, Others were blown hundreds of miles off course in the North Atlantic. Those that made it to the west coast of Ireland faced even worse conditions. Violent winds smashed ship after ship against the cliffs and beaches. Of the 130 ships that set sail from Spain, only around half made it home. Around 20,000 men died, not from battle, but from drowning, starvation, or exposure. On the Irish coast, entire crews washed ashore dead. Local villagers buried them in mass graves that are still being discovered today. One Spanish survivor, Francisco de Cuellar, left an eyewitness account. He described crawling ashore near Stridar Strand in Ireland after his ship wrecked, only to find beaches littered with bodies. He wrote, "Of those 1,100 men on my ship, not 100 survived." It was quite literally a weather-made apocalypse. Now, England didn't exactly discourage the idea that they had won a glorious victory. Queen Elizabeth turned the near miracle into powerful propaganda. She had a special victory medal struck, showing ships scattered by divine winds, with the Latin motto, Flavit Deus et dissipati sunt, meaning God blew and they were scattered. Even Elizabeth's famous Tilbury speech, where she declared that she had the heart and stomach of a king, helped cement the myth that England had triumphed through courage and leadership. In reality, most of the English ships were battered too. They were running low on food and gunpowder. Some historians estimate that more English sailors died from disease and hunger in the aftermath than from the battle itself. But the image of divine intervention, that God had sent a storm to defend Protestant England from Catholic Spain, became a cornerstone of national pride. And it worked. For centuries, schoolbooks and paintings celebrated the Armada's defeat as England's defining victory, the birth of the Royal Navy's legend. But if you actually chart the causes of the Spanish losses, it's astonishing how small a role English combat played compared to the weather. So what exactly happened with the weather in 1588? Modern researchers, including climate scientists and maritime archaeologists, have reconstructed it using tree rings, ice cores and contemporary ships' logs. They found that the summer of 1588 coincided with one of the coldest decades of the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that caused extreme and unpredictable weather patterns all across Europe. This meant stronger storms, unusual wind directions, and lower temperatures, all bad news for wooden sailing ships. The prevailing winds in the North Atlantic that summer were unusually strong and steady, blowing from the southwest, exactly the direction the Spanish needed to go. So while the Armada was trying to return home, it was literally sailing into the teeth of a storm. In other words, the English Navy might have fired the first shots, but the North Atlantic finished the job. The destruction of the Armada changed European history, but not in the way most people think. Spain remained a major power for decades. And just a year later, England tried to launch its own counter-armada to invade Spain, and that fleet was wrecked by storms too. Turns out divine winds don't always blow in your favour. But the legend stuck. The defeat of the Spanish Armada became a founding myth of English identity, a symbol of plucky resilience and national destiny. It helped shape the idea that England was a nation, protected by the sea, blessed by providence, and destined to rule the waves. Even though the real hero, or villain depending on your perspective, was the weather itself. So the next time someone says that England defeated the Spanish Armada, you can tell them that that's really only half the story. Yes, there was a strategy. Yes, there was bravery. But in the end, it wasn't Drake's cannons or Elizabeth's speeches that saved England. It was a storm. Or as the Armada survivors might have put it, God blew, and we were scattered. Thanks for watching History of the World. If you've learned something new, click subscribe.